The concept of faith is deeply intertwined with the pursuit of justice. See, throughout history, God has revealed a consistent concern for the oppressed, marginalized, and disinherited. Now, social justice is not an abstract ideal for those who believe in God, it's a divine mandate. Let us explore how God has been an active agent in history, scripture, and our modern understanding of justice, as well as how we are called to continue this work in our communities. See, God has always been inside of the history of social justice, and the Bible is filled with narratives and teachings that affirm God's commitment to justice and liberation. See, each story challenges us to take action against oppression and to stand for fairness and equity. We can look at the story of Moses and the liberation of the Israelites in Exodus chapters 3 through 14. When the Israelites groaned under the weight of Egyptian slavery, God responded. Through Moses, God led a campaign of liberation that dismantled the systematic oppression they faced. This story is not just an ancient historical event, it is a declaration that God sides with the oppressed and actively works for their freedom. We can also look at Levitical laws inside of the book of Leviticus, the 19th chapter, verses 9 and 10. We see the laws for the poor and the vulnerable. In these verses, God commands the people of Israel to leave gleanings inside of their fields for the poor and for strangers. This principle teaches that social justice is a shared responsibility. It requires generosity and provision for those in need. Now, the idea of leaving resources for the marginalized is a call for community care and accountability. When we jump over inside of the New Testament, we see the parable of the Good Samaritan inside of the book of Luke, the 10th chapter, verses 25 through 37. Now, Jesus' parable highlights the need for compassion that transcends societal and cultural boundaries. When a Samaritan, a member of a group despised by the Jews, showed mercy to a wounded man, he demonstrated that true justice looks like this thing that doesn't have any type of box contingent on whatever your social status is or even what your cultural status is. See, this story reminds us that love and compassion should guide our interactions, especially with those who are different from us. Jumping back to the Old Testament, Amos, that prophet, called for justice inside of his 5th chapter, verses 21 through 24. The prophet Amos denounces this hollow religion and the practices that we have inside of our current way of doing religion that ignore the needs of the oppressed. In these powerful words inside of the scripture, let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream, we are reminded that worship without justice is meaningless. This should sound familiar because, Martin Luther King said it many times. Now, God desires a faith that is active in the pursuit of equity and fairness. Finally, I'm going to give one more example. Jesus and the woman caught in adultery. Inside of the book of John, the 8th chapter, verses 1 through 11, when a woman was brought before Jesus to be condemned for adultery, he advocated for mercy and fairness. Now, what does this do? It challenges us, and it also inside of that time challenged the biases and hypocrisy of her accusers. Jesus' actions demonstrate that justice involves not only fairness, but also compassion, particularly for those society unfairly targets. Now, God has always been a defender of the oppressed. I love the work of James H. Cone, who is the father of Black liberation theology. He famously said that God is a God of the oppressed. This idea is woven throughout scripture, and God repeatedly shows God's preference for the downtrodden, standing against systems of injustice and calling his followers to do the same. Now, in modern terms, this means aligning ourselves with those who are marginalized. I'm talking about the poor, the incarcerated, the disinherited. Cone reminds us that the struggle for justice is not separate from faith. It is an expression of our faith. See, we worship a God who stands with those that society overlooks or mistreats. So now, faith in the basic human rights. I love teaching about the basic human rights because social justice is rooted in the belief that every individual is created in the image of God and therefore deserves dignity and respect. God's justice encompasses the following fundamental human rights, is what I like to call them. The first one is the right to necessities. Everyone deserves access to food, shelter, and healthcare. The biblical principles of gleaning and hospitality show that meeting basic needs is central to justice. The second one is the right to personal belief systems. There is this freedom of conscience is a reflection of God's respect for human autonomy. Jesus' ministry affirmed an individual's right to explore their faith without coercion or fear. Then we have the right to autonomy. And the Bible affirms individuality and uniqueness. Each person is called to live authentically, exercising their God-given gifts and talents. The fourth one is that we have a right to just systems. God repeatedly challenges corrupt systems. From the Exodus to the prophets, we see a clear message. Systems must be fair, equitable, and accountable to the marginalized. The last thing is the right to express yourself. And I love the fact that the Psalms in particular are filled with raw emotion. If you get a chance, read the Psalms inside of its entirety, because it talks about joy and anger and lament and sorrow and depression and happiness. It covers so many different raw emotions, and God invites honest expression, affirming that our voices matter. Injustice often, watch this, silences people's emotion, but faith demands that we amplify the voices of the unheard. So what do we do? Well, faith without action is dead. As James, the second chapter in the 26th verse reminds us, social justice is not an optional component of faith. It is its living embodiment. And there are three things that I always like to propose as we are living out this calling of faith in social justice. The first thing is to educate yourself and others. Okay, we've got to learn about the issues facing the marginalized, the disinherited, the oppressed. We've got to learn about those issues facing these communities inside of our area, not across the world, but inside of our area. And then once we've done that, share this knowledge to inspire others to act, along with take on some own personal responsibility. Okay. The second thing is to engage in advocacy. I'll give you like one more minute. Engage in advocacy. We have to speak up against systems of injustice, whether it's lobbying for fair policies, volunteering with organizations, or simply standing with someone in need. Every action counts. And then the last simple thing that we can all do with faith in social justice is to live generously. This reflects the principle of Leviticus 19, 9 and 10 that I already talked about in our daily life. We have to learn how to just share our resources, share our time, our money, and our skills with those in need. So to wrap it up, faith and social justice are inseparable. The God of the Bible is a God who liberates, defends, and uplifts the oppressed. As followers of this God, we are called to do the same. By standing for justice, advocating for the vulnerable, and embodying compassion, we fulfill our divine mandate to love and serve as God does. So I say it again. Let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream.